For 10 years, I believed you betrayed me. You destroyed everything I loved. I let you hate me because the truth was more dangerous than your hatred.
For 10 years, Ajara hated her twin sister Amara, believing Amara had betrayed her, destroyed the love of her life, and walked away without remorse. But on the night Ajara finally confronted her again, Amara looked into her sister's eyes and whispered, "I let you hate me because the truth was more dangerous than your hatred." Ajara was now a successful fashion designer who had built a new life far from the family compound. But the wound her twin had left behind had never healed. Amara, meanwhile, had spent 10 years living quietly, carrying a secret that nobody in Ajara knew, not their mother, not Ajara, not even the man whose disappearance had torn the sisters apart. When the twins finally stood face to face again, Ajara expected an apology. Instead, Amara placed an old envelope into her hands. Inside was a photograph taken 10 years earlier, the same night Ajara believed Amara had betrayed her. Ajara stared at it. Her fingers began to tremble. Because standing beside Amara in that photograph was the man Ajara had spent 10 years believing was her victim. And behind them stood a stranger
What is
Ajara
this?
had never seen before. But why had Amara kept that photograph hidden for 10 years? Why had she allowed her own twin sister to hate her when one sentence could have changed everything? And most frightening of all, what truth could possibly be so dangerous that Amara would rather lose Ajara's love than tell her the truth? The photograph slipped slightly between Ajara's fingers as she stared at the unfamiliar man's face. 10 years earlier, she would have recognized every detail of Daniel Reed's smile, the small dimple near his cheek, the expensive watch he always wore, even the faint scar above his right eyebrow. Daniel had been the man she intended to marry. Now she barely recognized the woman she had been when she loved him. Ajara had become a different kind of woman. At 30, she owned House of Ajara, a thriving fashion label in Lagos, whose showroom occupied 2 floors of a modern commercial building. Her designs had appeared at major events. Wealthy clients flew in to order her custom pieces, and the black SUV waiting outside the Carter family compound belonged to her. She had money now. Independence. A beautiful apartment. A carefully constructed life. But none of it had purchased peace. Whenever someone mentioned twins, Ajara remembered Amara. Amara had chosen a quieter existence. She worked with figures rather than fashion, managing accounts for a modest agricultural company in another town. She had no luxury car, no designer wardrobe, and no social reputation comparable to Ajara's. Yet she had something Ajara did not know she possessed. Evidence. And she had carried it for 10 years. The old family compound stood exactly where Ajara remembered it, although age had darkened the walls and cracked the veranda tiles. Her mother's tailoring shop was still attached to the house. Margaret Carter had built it from almost nothing after her husband's death, and over the years, the business had become modestly profitable. The family was not poor anymore, but they were not wealthy enough to ignore the value of the land beneath their feet. That land had once been almost worthless. Now developers were moving into Ajara. Roads were expanding, and property prices had multiplied. Margaret had quietly refused every offer. Ajara had never understood why. As a teenager, she remembered her mother once saying, "One day, this land will give my daughters the future I couldn't afford to give them." At the time, Ajara had laughed. She had not known that someone else had been listening. Someone who would eventually make the land the center of a dangerous plan. The sound of the compound gate opening pulled Ajara back to the present. She turned. Amara stood beneath the old mango tree. For one painful second, Ajara saw the girl she used to know, the sister who had slept beside her whenever thunder frightened her, who had once taken the blame for a broken window so Ajara would not be punished, who had whispered childhood secrets beneath the same tree. Then the memory of Daniel returned. The night he disappeared. The accusation. The missing money. Amara's silence. Ajara's jaw tightened. Ajara, Amara said softly. I came for Mother. I know. Not for you. Amara absorbed the words without protest. That silence was familiar. It was the same silence that had tormented Ajara for 10 years. Ajara stepped closer. You had 10 years to explain yourself. Amara looked at her. I know. Then explain. Amara's eyes moved briefly toward the house. Not here. Ajara's anger sharpened. Why? Are you still afraid someone will hear you? Amara did not answer. Before Ajara could demand more, Margaret's bedroom door opened. Their mother appeared in the doorway, visibly weaker than Ajara remembered, one hand gripping the frame for support. Her eyes moved from Ajara to Amara. 2 daughters. 2 lives. 1 wound. Both of you, Margaret whispered, come inside. Ajara hesitated. Margaret's voice trembled. There is something I should have told you 10 years ago. Amara closed her eyes. Because she already knew what was coming. And for the first time since she had returned to Ajara, she looked genuinely afraid. Margaret led them into the sitting room, moving slowly, one hand pressed against her chest. The room still carried the scent of starch, fabric, and the lavender soap she had used for years. Ajara sat opposite Amara, leaving the widest possible space between them. Before either twin spoke, Ajara noticed the old photograph above the television. It showed 3 people standing proudly outside the tailoring shop, Margaret in the middle, Ajara on her right, and Amara on her left. They were 17 then, young, happy, still inseparable. Ajara remembered that day. Their mother had just received payment for a large uniform contract, and the twins had spent the afternoon teasing each other about who would inherit the sewing machine. Amara had laughed and said, Ajara will sell it before she learns how to use it. Ajara had chased her around the compound. For a moment the memory softened her, but then came another memory, Daniel standing beside Amara. The accusation, the disappearance. Ajara looked away. Margaret lowered herself into her chair. Before I tell you what happened 10 years ago, she said, you both need to understand what your father left behind. Ajara frowned. Our father, Margaret nodded. The land. The word seemed ordinary, but Amara immediately stiffened. Ajara noticed. What land? Margaret looked toward the window. The land behind this compound was bought by your father before either of you was born. When he died, I kept it in both your names. Stared at her. You never told me that. I was waiting for the right time. Amara whispered. Mama, Margaret raised her hand. No, 10 years ago I was afraid. Today I am tired of being afraid. Ajara leaned forward. What does the land have to do with Daniel? Margaret's silence answered before her words did. Ajara's heart began pounding. She looked at Amara. Her twin was staring at the floor. For 10 years, Ajara had believed Amara's betrayal began with Daniel. Now she wondered if Daniel had only been the beginning. Margaret reached beneath the table and brought out a small, weathered metal box. I kept this because I knew one day, she whispered, my daughters would need to know the truth. She placed the box between them, then she looked directly at Ajara. Once you open it, there will be no going back. Ajara stared at the metal box as though it might contain the missing 10 years of her life. Open it, she said. Amara immediately looked up. Ajara, wait. Ajara turned sharply. What are you afraid I'll find? Amara said nothing. That silence was enough. Ajara pulled the box toward herself and opened it. Inside were property documents, old bank statements, a faded photograph, and several envelopes tied together with a thin piece of brown string. Margaret watched her daughters carefully. The land was never just land, she said. Your father bought it because he believed Ajara would one day become what it is becoming now. Ajara unfolded the first document. The current estimated value of the property made her eyes widen. It was worth several million. She looked at her mother. You kept this from me. I kept it from everyone. A flashback came sharply to Ajara. She was 16 again, standing outside the shop while 2 well-dressed men spoke with Margaret. One of them had offered money. Margaret had refused. Ajara had never understood why her mother became frightened after they left. Now she remembered something else. One of the men had looked toward the house and asked, which one is Ajara? At the time, she had forgotten the question. Now it returned with frightening clarity. Ajara slowly looked at Amara. You knew. Amara's eyes glistened. Yes. Long before Daniel disappeared, Ajara pushed back her chair. So you knew my fiancé was interested in mother's land. I knew he was involved with someone who wanted it. You said nothing. I tried to tell you. You accused me of jealousy, Ajara snapped. Amara whispered. I warned you because I loved you. Ajara laughed bitterly. Love, you let me believe you destroyed my life. Amara looked as though the words physically hurt. Margaret reached for another envelope. There is more. Ajara stopped. Margaret placed the envelope on the table. Written across the front were 4 words, for Ajara if needed. Ajara recognized the handwriting immediately, Amara's. Ajara stared at the envelope. For 10 years, she had imagined Amara's handwriting in countless places, on letters she never received, on apologies she never heard, on explanations that never came. Now one was sitting directly in front of her. She picked it up. Why did you write this? Amara swallowed. Because I knew there might come a day when you would finally ask. Ajara's fingers tightened around the paper. If I hadn't asked, then you would never have read it. Answer angered Ajara more than she expected. She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ajara, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I prayed would never happen. Ajara's breathing slowed. The words blurred for a moment. She blinked and continued. You probably hate me. Her eyes moved toward Amara. Amara was crying silently. I know what you think happened. I know what Daniel told you. I know what you saw. But what you saw was only the part of the story they wanted you to see. Ajara stopped reading. Amara looked at Margaret. Margaret lowered her head. Ajara continued. Daniel was not acting alone. The room seemed to shrink. A sharp flashback tore through Ajara's mind. 10 years earlier, Daniel had been standing in their courtyard, smiling as he promised her that everything would be fine. She remembered the expensive watch on his wrist. She remembered him kissing her forehead. She remembered turning around and seeing Amara watching them from the doorway. At the time, Ajara had mistaken the expression on her sister's face for jealousy. Now she wondered if it had been fear. She returned to the letter. There is a man named Victor Hale. Daniel has been meeting him. They are interested in mother's land. I don't know how far they are willing to go. Ajara's hand began trembling. Victor Hale, she whispered. Amara nodded. You know him. I've heard the name. You have heard the name because he came here 3 times before Daniel disappeared. Looked at her sharply. Why didn't Mother tell me? Margaret's voice cracked. Because the 3rd time, Victor stopped pretending he wanted to buy the land. Silence filled the room. What did he say? Ajara asked. Margaret looked at both daughters. He told me that refusing him would bring trouble to my family. Ajara's anger slowly changed into something else. Fear. She looked down at the letter again. At the bottom was a sentence that made her heart stop. If anything happens to me, do not trust Daniel. Ajara looked up. Amara met her eyes. I found out what Daniel was planning the night he disappeared. Ajara whispered, What did you find? Amara hesitated, then she said, I recorded him. Amara's confession seemed to drain the air from the room. You recorded him? Ajara asked. Amara nodded. Everything. Not everything. Enough. Stared at her twin, trying to reconcile the woman in front of her with the sister she had hated for a decade. Then why didn't you show it to me? Amara looked down at her hands. Because Daniel knew I had it. A memory rose sharply. 10 years earlier, Amara had stood outside the tailoring shop after dark, watching Daniel leave. She had followed him to an abandoned warehouse near the old market. Through a broken window, she had seen him with Victor Hale. Victor had spoken first. The land must be secured before the developers arrive, had answered. Margaret won't sell. She will when her daughters need money. Amara had secretly switched on her phone. Her hands had trembled as she recorded. Then Daniel had said something that made her blood run cold. If Ajara refuses to listen, I'll make her sister look responsible. Amara had covered her mouth. She had understood then that the missing money was not an accident. It was a trap. Back in the present, Ajara wiped a tear from her cheek. You had proof. I thought I did. Happened. Daniel discovered the recording. Amara's voice weakened. He cornered me that night. He told me that if I went to the police, they would make sure you were blamed too. Ajara shook her head. But you could have told me. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Amara finally looked directly at her. Because he showed me a document with your name on it. Ajara froze. What document? Before Amara could answer, someone knocked heavily on the front door. All 3 women fell silent. Another knock followed. Then a man's voice came from outside. Margaret, I know your daughters are inside. Ajara's face changed. She knew that voice. Daniel Reed had returned. Ajara's chair scraped backward. For 10 years, she had imagined Daniel's face in dreams. Don't open the door, Amara said. Ajara stared at her. You knew he was alive. No. Another knock. Margaret, Daniel called. We need to talk. Ajara's pulse hammered. She remembered the night he disappeared. Daniel standing in the courtyard, telling her he had been accused unfairly. Then Amara had appeared, pale and breathless, ordering Ajara not to follow him. Ajara had believed Amara was protecting Daniel. Now she wondered whether Amara had been protecting her. The door opened. Daniel stepped inside. He looked older, but unmistakably familiar. Ajara. She could barely breathe. You're alive. Daniel gave a sad smile. I never stopped thinking about you. Amara moved between them. Why are you here? Daniel's expression hardened. I came for what belongs to me. Margaret stood. Nothing here belongs to you. Daniel glanced toward the metal box. I see you finally opened it. Ajara turned toward Amara. How does he know about the box? Amara said nothing. Daniel stepped closer. Your sister has been lying to you for 10 years. Ajara's stomach tightened. Then tell me. Daniel looked at Amara. She knows exactly why. Amara's face went pale. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table. It showed Amara outside the warehouse on the night Daniel disappeared. Ajara picked it up. Her hands trembled. Ask your sister what she was doing there, Daniel whispered. Ajara looked at Amara. For the first time, Amara seemed genuinely terrified. Then Daniel added, and ask her what happened to the man standing beside her. The room fell silent. Ajara stared at the photograph. Two shadows stood behind Amara. One belonged to Daniel. The other belonged to a stranger. Who was he and why had Amara never mentioned him? Ajara kept staring at the photograph. Who is he? Amara did not answer immediately. Daniel smiled. That is the question your sister should have answered 10 years ago. Ajara turned toward Amara. Tell me. Amara's eyes remained fixed on Daniel. His name is Samuel. Samuel who? Samuel Hale. Daniel's smile disappeared. Ajara noticed. You know him. Said nothing. Amara finally explained. Samuel was Victor Hale's nephew. He worked for him, but unlike Victor, he became frightened when he discovered what they were planning. A sharp flashback returned to Amara. 10 years earlier, after secretly recording Daniel and Victor, she had fled the warehouse. She had barely reached the road when Samuel stepped from the shadows. He had been waiting for her. He had not threatened her. Instead, he had whispered, If you want your sister alive, don't go home yet. Amara had stared at him in disbelief. Samuel then showed her a folder containing copies of financial transfers, property documents, and a list of names. Ajara's name was on the final page. Amara's heart had nearly stopped. Back in the present, Ajara whispered, What did they want with me? Amara looked at her. They wanted you to sign something. Suddenly interrupted. She's lying. Amara turned. You know I'm not. Daniel's face tightened. Ajara stepped between them. What was I supposed to sign? Neither answered. Margaret suddenly remembered something. The wedding papers. Ajara looked at her mother. What? Margaret's voice shook. Before Daniel disappeared, he brought me documents. He said they were necessary for your marriage and business partnership. Amara nodded slowly. They weren't marriage papers. Ajara's blood ran cold. What were they? Amara looked directly into her sister's eyes. Documents transferring your interest in mother's land. Suddenly lunged for the metal box, but Ajara grabbed it first. And for the first time, she realized the betrayal had never been about Daniel's disappearance. It had been about what he intended to steal. Ajara held the metal box against her chest. So that was the plan. Daniel's silence answered her. You wanted my signature, she said. You wanted me to surrender my share of mother's land without knowing what I was signing. Daniel recovered quickly. You're listening to a woman who has lied to you for 10 years. Ajara looked at Amara. Did you know about those documents before the wedding? Yes. Why didn't you stop me? I tried. Amara's voice broke. I took them from Daniel's briefcase the night before he planned to bring them to you. That was when he realized I knew too much. A flashback moved through Ajara's mind. The morning before Daniel disappeared, Amara had stood outside her bedroom door. "Please don't sign anything Daniel gives you." Ajara had slammed the door in her face. At the time, she had thought Amara was trying to sabotage her wedding. Now that memory felt like a warning she had deliberately refused to hear. Daniel stepped toward her. "Ajara, your sister manipulated you. She wanted you to herself." Amara shook her head. "No, I wanted her alive." Daniel's expression changed. Ajara saw it. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Fear. For the first time, she understood that Daniel was afraid of what Amara knew. "What happened that night?" Ajara demanded. Amara took a breath. "After I recorded Daniel and Victor, Samuel helped me escape. He told me Daniel had already arranged for the missing money to be traced to me." Then why did Daniel disappear? Because Victor realized Samuel had turned against him. Daniel suddenly moved toward the door. Ajara blocked him. "You're not leaving." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A message appeared on the screen. "We know where your mother lives." Ajara's blood ran cold. But Amara did not look surprised. Instead, she whispered, "They found us." The message remained on Daniel's phone. Ajara read it twice. Then she looked toward the window. The compound suddenly felt too quiet. "Who sent that?" she asked. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "You think I'm the danger," he said. "You have no idea what Victor will do if he learns what Amara kept." Amara stepped forward. "Stop pretending you're protecting us." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You should have destroyed that recording." Ajara's heart stopped. "You just admitted there is a recording." Daniel realized his mistake. Amara gave Ajara a look. For 10 years, they had communicated through silence. Now, for the first time, Ajara understood what her sister's eyes were saying. "Trust me." Ajara nodded. Amara went to the old sewing cabinet and removed a loose wooden panel. Behind it was a small memory card wrapped in plastic. Ajara stared. "You kept it here." "I moved it several times," Amara said. "I never trusted one hiding place." A flashback showed Amara returning to Ajara years earlier, after learning that Victor had begun searching the family compound. She had entered the empty shop at night, lifted the panel, and hidden the card beneath the wood. She had done the same thing every few years, changing its location whenever she suspected she was being watched. The recording was finally played. Daniel's younger voice filled the room. "Once Ajara signs, the land is ours." Victor answered, "And if she refuses?" Daniel hesitated. "Her sister will make sure she doesn't." Ajara stared at Amara. Then another voice spoke. "Samuel. She knows too much. If you hurt either girl, I'll take everything to the police." The recording ended. Daniel's face drained of color. Ajara's eyes filled with tears. For 10 years, she had believed Amara had destroyed her future. But the evidence revealed something far more painful. Amara had been fighting to save it. Margaret reached for her daughter's hands. But before anyone could speak, a car stopped outside the compound. Amara looked toward the gate. "That isn't Victor." Ajara frowned. "Then who is it?" The front door began to open, and a familiar voice called from outside. "Amara." It was Samuel. Samuel stepped into the room carrying a worn leather folder. Ajara studied him carefully. He was older than the man in the photograph, but the same scar ran across his jaw. Amara's expression softened with relief. "You came." "I told you I would," Samuel replied. Daniel stepped backward. Samuel looked at him. 10 years ago, you disappeared because Victor sent you away after you threatened to expose him. You changed your name, crossed the border, and stayed hidden, but you never stopped working for him." Daniel shook his head. "That isn't true." Samuel placed the folder on the table. Inside were bank records, property documents, copies of Daniel's messages, and evidence connecting Victor to the fraudulent transfers. Ajara looked at the documents, then at Amara. The truth finally connected every broken piece. The missing money had been planted. The marriage documents had been designed to transfer Ajara's share of the land. Daniel had disappeared because Amara discovered the scheme. Amara had stayed away because the threats against Ajara continued. And the hatred Ajara had carried for 10 years had been built on a lie. But another truth hurt almost as much. Amara had chosen silence. She had believed protecting Ajara meant deciding what Ajara was allowed to know. Ajara turned toward her. "You saved me," she whispered. Amara began crying. "But I lost you." Ajara walked closer. "For 10 years, I hated you." "I know. I called you a traitor." "I know. I wished I had never been born your sister." Amara's tears fell freely. "I know." Ajara embraced her. "But I was wrong about why you left." Amara held her tightly. "I was wrong too. I should have trusted you with the truth." Margaret watched her daughters and quietly wiped her eyes. Outside, police vehicles arrived after Samuel had contacted the authorities. Daniel was taken away for questioning, while evidence against Victor was formally submitted. Months later, the family land remained theirs. Ajara expanded her fashion company into the old tailoring shop. Amara became her financial partner. But their greatest inheritance was not the land or money. It was the lesson 10 painful years had taught them. One evening, Ajara and Amara stood beneath the mango tree where they had first reunited. Ajara smiled. "Do you remember what Mama always told us?" Amara nodded. "That we came into this world together." Ajara squeezed her hand. "And that we shouldn't let pride take us out of it separately." They laughed through their tears. They had lost 10 years. They could never get them back. But they could choose what to do with the years that remained. And from that day forward, they made one promise. No more secrets disguised as protection. No more judgments without truth. No more allowing fear to speak louder than love. Because Ajara finally understood that sometimes the person you hate for abandoning you may have been fighting a battle you never knew existed. And Amara learned that even when love gives you a reason to hide the truth, real love also requires the courage to share it. For when fear separates hearts, only truth can bring them home.